Alright, I think everyone's here. Let's see, who else is still ringing? Donna, has anyone heard from Donna? Hold on, say that again? So her daughter's telling her that she belongs in church? Is that what you're saying? Okay. Alright, the other night we started talking about a topic, and I thought today we'd try to expand on that a little bit. And looking into ZOAR, and I think also I may have offered a study, a conclusion on ZOAR, but I think this is sort of like going beyond that and looking at another aspect of ZOAR, which I think also maybe at some point in time in the past we may have touched on, but never really got into the details. So tonight I'll post a few verses and then get some feedback from you guys. The the setting is Lot and his wife and family, and they're fleeing Sodom and Gomorrah. Let me hang on one second. And so we'll look at the verses in the book of Genesis. First, Genesis 19, verse 19. Behold, now thy servant have found grace in thy sight, and thou hast magnified thy mercy, which thou hast shewed unto me in saving my life. And I cannot escape to the mountain, lest some evil take me and I die. And by the way, I think the phrase or the word mountain in this context is also talking about Babylon. So we're looking at Lot not wanting to come under God's wrath by going to the mountains, but at the same time he is asking to try and find refuge in ZOAR. And Eric might be able to give us, I guess, maybe later on, some more information about the name ZOAR itself, the origin, and we'll try to tie that into this study as well. Hang on one second. Now in Genesis 19 verse 20, behold, now this city is near to flee unto, and it is a little one. And also the word little, I think that's also significant, although we're not going to deviate right now. Or let me escape thither, is it not a little one, and my soul shall live. So I think the context clearly is showing that Lot wanting to go into ZOAR is in order to be spared from the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. And verse 21, and he said unto him, see, I have accepted thee concerning this thing also, that I will not overthrow this city for the which thou hast spoken. And then in verse 22, haste thee, escape thither, for I cannot do anything till thou come thither. That's verse 22. All right. I cannot do anything till I become thither. Therefore, the name of the city was called ZOAR. Now, notice in verse 23, the sun was risen upon the earth. The sun was risen upon the earth when Lot entered into ZOAR. Now, that is significant. I'm just going to post two related verses just to give you maybe a little bit of a flare on that, but we're not going to get too far into it because that would be going into another branch. In was it James? Yeah, James chapter 1, verse 11. Oops, I think I posted the wrong verse. Hang on one second. No, actually, yeah, that's the verse to come in. Matthew chapter 5, verse 45. That ye may be the children of your Father which is in heaven, for he maketh his sun to rise on the evil and on the good, and sendeth rain on the just and on the unjust. Now, haven't you guys, I know I have in the past, really questioned this verse here? How does God make his sun to rise on the evil as well as the good? I know we can look at it from a literal standpoint. God makes the sun to shine and everyone enjoys the benefit of it, right? But I think this is a language of judgment. The idea of making the sun to rise on the evil. That's certainly not to give them any blessing, is it? Right? At least spiritually, in the end. God could not be speaking of salvation for Babylon. But here we see a distinction that God is focusing on the judgment as well as the salvation. And we'll talk some more about that again, maybe later on tonight or some other time. And in James chapter 1, verse 11, for the sun is no sooner risen. You've probably seen this verse also. For the sun is no sooner risen with a burning heat, but it withereth the grass, and the flower thereof falleth. You see that? So the sun rising with a burning heat, that's the language of judgment, isn't it? And Christ is the sun. So again, I think we do see that God is speaking of the judgment that comes on Babylon, but it comes through the Son, through Christ, in the day of judgment, right? All right, so that's something to think about. Take a look at these verses, the flight to Babylon. We'll try to compare them to Lot wanting to go into ZOAR. Babylon, safe haven and tribulation. And again, these are some of these verses I touched on just a little bit last time. Take a look at Micah chapter 4, verse 10. Be in pain and labor to bring forth, O daughter of Zion, like a woman in travail, for now shalt thou go forth out of the city, and thou shalt dwell in the field, thou shalt go even to Babylon, there shalt thou be delivered. You see that? There the Lord shall redeem thee from the hand of thine enemies. The point I want to try to make here, is there an issue there, Eric, with the mic? Or the point that I'm trying to make there is the command to go to Babylon and the command to go to ZOAR in order to find deliverance is really speaking of the same thing. It's the church, the collective body. Now, in this particular case, the believers being a part of Babylon and being ordered by God to stay, to remain, to go to Babylon. If they don't go to Babylon, then they're not going to be delivered. You see that? So in Daniel 12, verse 1, and at that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince which standeth for the children of thy people, and there shall be a time of trouble. That's tribulation, right? Such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time. At that time thy people shall be delivered, every one that shall be found written in the book. So what are we gleaning from this? God, again and again, I think in the Bible, we see that there had to come a time when the elect, the body itself, would go into ZOAR, would go into tribulation. And only then, without the church going through, that's like, that reminds me of another verse where God speaks of the third part going through the fire. And God would bring the third part through the fire. Without the elect actually suffering, enduring patiently tribulation, they would not be delivered. You see that? Jeremiah chapter 38, verse 17. We also read, Then said Jeremiah unto Zedekiah, Thus saith the Lord, the God of hosts, the God of Israel, If thou wilt assuredly go forth unto the king of Babylon's princes, then thy soul shall live. This city shall not be burned with fire, and thou shalt live, and thine house. Now, why would God give this command? Can you begin to see again? God is calling for the nation of Israel at a time when Israel was under attack, and Nebuzaradan, we're going to read about him a little bit in a few minutes, Nebuzaradan, and also the king of Babylon, King Nebuchadnezzar, God called for, God allowed them. See, here's another example again, I think, of God using the wicked to judge the body. Is there a problem there, Eric, or? Oh, okay, okay. Your your phone, all right. So God is using the body itself. God is using the king of Babylon, the leaders of Babylon, to bring judgment to the people of Israel and commanding them not to resist. You cannot resist. This is God's judgment on you. And God's plan is for you to go to Babylon. And only then, once you've spent a certain amount of time in Babylon, then God would visit them and deliver them. So that's the thread I think we're reading here. Jeremiah 27 verse 12. I spake also to Zedekiah, king of Babylon, all these words, saying, bring your necks under the yoke of the king of Babylon, and serve him and his people, and live. Verse 17, Jeremiah chapter 27. We read here also, hearken not unto them, serve the king of Babylon, and live. Wherefore should this city be laid waste? Jeremiah chapter 46 verse 26. And I will deliver them into the hand of those that seek their life. Now, I mean, can you tell me, how is it possible that today, how is it possible today we want to try to give credit to the believers as the ones that are judging the unbelievers, right? I mean, how is that possible? They're telling you, at least some are trying to tell you, that God is using the elect to bring judgment on the church or on the world. How? Through the message that God's judgment is now on the world, and that's how God is judging the world. How can that be possible? I think we can see from this context and the rest of the Bible that that would not be the case. We read, well, in this verse here, I will deliver them into the hand of those that seek their lives, and into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and into the hand of his servants. Afterward it shall be inhabited. So in other words, afterward God would revisit Babylon, as in the days of old, saith the Lord. Now, it's important to keep in mind, it is, when we're talking about Babylon at the time of tribulation, it is the collective body that is going into Babylon, or I'm sorry, it is the collective body that is Babylon. And the believers are a part of Babylon. They're not coming out of Babylon yet. Does that make sense? The believers are a part of the corporate body. So when Lot is going into ZOAR, it is the believers now being ordered to stay in ZOAR. That is safety. It is a safe haven for them. It's a safe haven for them. They had to go, they had to put their necks under the yoke of the king of Babylon in order for God later on to redeem them. We also read Jeremiah 52 verse 15. Then Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, carried away captive of the poor of the people, and the residue of the people that remain in the city, and those that fell away, that fell to the king of Babylon, and the rest of the multitude. Right? Jeremiah 52 verse 16. But Nebuzaradan, and this is another picture I think we're beginning to see here. Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, left of the poor of the land for vine dressers and for husbandmen. So it's not surprising, I think, in a lot of ways, to see God shifting from one image to another, right? And that has to be the case. When we talked about the account of Noah going into the ark, which is salvation, and then also Noah leaving the ark, that too was salvation. So God, I think, has the authority and is able to move from one image to another depending on what he's trying to get across. So, and also in 2 Kings chapter 25 verse 24, Gedaliah sware to them and to their men, and said unto them, fear not to be the servants of the Chaldees. Dwell in the land and serve the king of Babylon, and it shall be well with you. Jeremiah 38 verse 18, the last verse in this section. We read here, but if thou wilt go forth to the king of Babylon's princes, then shall this city be given into the hand of the Chaldeans, and they shall burn it with fire, and thou shalt not escape out of their hand. So the command is go to Babylon. Why? Because the city was under siege. God was destroying the city. God was using the enemy, a third party, the pit bull. Remember, God is using Satan, the enemy of the children of Israel, to come into the land and to burn it down. And in doing so, he is also taking others captive. Now, God, it's not the time yet when God would deliver them from Babylon, but it is part of the salvation process. It begins with going into tribulation, going into Babylon, going into ZOAR, which is a form of safe haven, because if you disobey that command, then you would be destroyed. You would be destroyed. All right. Any questions so far? Any questions? I just have a couple of additional verses dealing with leaving ZOAR, and then we'll wrap it up. Now, can anyone tell me, what do you suppose the message would be in the believers now, or Lot leaving ZOAR, coming out of Babylon, right? That is redemption, coming out of the church, not literally. Very important, not literally. It's not a physical departure, leaving the building, leaving the fellowship, the organization that is going to provide any kind of spiritual substance, right? But yet, many people, I think today, they want to use that to try and justify a doctrine on physically having to leave the church. And I heard, I guess Chris again today was talking about, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the messaging that I heard earlier today in the question and answer series, which I happen to stumble on, or I was listening to at least a portion of it anyway. Genesis chapter 19 verse 30, and Lot went up out of Zoar and dwelt in a mountain, and his 2 daughters with him, for he feared to dwell in Zoar, and he dwelt in a cave, he and his 2 daughters. Song of Solomon chapter 4 verse 6. Until the daybreak and the shadows flee away, I will get me to the mountain of mirth and to the hill of frankincense. Now, leaving Zoar, fear for fear, I don't think it's an accident that we read this here, because fear, the Bible also says that that there is torment and fear, right? How does that verse go? You guys remember that verse? Where God speaks of, and fear ultimately is identified with Babylon. That there is no fear and torment, right? There's no fear and torment. And let me open my online Bible here. So that I think is very important, because now I believe we're shifting gears again with Lot leaving Zoar and then going to dwell in a cave. So he's coming out of Zoar for fear. Well, that's significant, because again, we're talking about the spiritual nature of the Bible, and every word there is important, and we have to try to relate that to the gospel. We also read Zechariah chapter 14 verse 5, and ye shall flee to the valley of the mountains. Now this is Lot leaving Zoar, which I'm proposing here is coming out of Babylon, because there is fear in Babylon. Babylon is fear itself, and Lot fears to dwell in Babylon, and now he desires to leave Zoar, right? Zechariah chapter 14 verse 5, ye shall flee to the valley of the mountains, for the valley of the mountains shall reach unto Azel. Ye shall flee like as ye fled from before the earthquake in the days of Uzziah king of Judah, and the Lord my God shall come, and all his saints with thee. So fleeing to the valley of the mountains, Lot going to a cave, which is again another picture. We're not going to get too far into it tonight. But leaving Zoar out of fear. So Babylon, going into Babylon is fear itself, because Babylon is fear. Fear has to do with God's judgment on the church. It begins with the tribulation, and that's why the believers now are commanded to go into ZOAR, into Babylon, and the tribulation, and then later on, at the appointed time, God would redeem them from Babylon. But when ye shall see, Mark 13:14, when ye shall see the abomination of desolation, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing where it ought not, let him that readeth understand, let them which be in Judea flee to the mountains. Now, Judea in this case, we can't think of Judea um, as salvation. Judea is the corporate body, but it is the corporate body gone bad. So that would be representative also, I believe, of ZOAR, or the elect being a part of Babylon prior to the separation. Luke 21:21, then let them which be in Judea flee to the mountains, let them which are in the midst of it depart out, let not them that are in the countries enter thereinto. And finally, Revelation 18 verse 10, speaking of fear, and Lot desired to leave ZOAR for fear, and we read, standing afar off for the fear of her torment. The fear of her torment. That is what happens when God now brings Babylon on Babylon. We have church suicide for the fear of her torment, saying, Alas, alas, that great city Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour is thy judgment come. So God destroys Babylon, or God redeems the believers from Babylon, and then turns the unsaved against themselves. All right, let's look at the summary, and then we'll open for questions. So Lot fleeing Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot fleeing Sodom and Gomorrah into ZOAR appears to be command for the church to go to Babylon and tribulation, where God would later redeem it. It's important to note, as I said earlier, that Babylon represents the whole church. That's a body, where the elect are also found. And this body is redeemed. Lot leaving for fear of dwelling in ZOAR appears to be pointing to the time when God does redeem the church from Babylon. All right.